My wife's contempt had a price tag. $7 to be exact, the clearance sticker still half peeled from the corner of the gift bag. Sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the one everyone stopped watching years ago. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 47 years old, and for the past 14 years I've worked as an independent pharmaceutical researcher, running a small lab out of a converted warehouse on the east side of Portland. Not glamorous work. I don't attend conferences in Geneva or give TED Talks. I synthesize drug delivery compounds, file patents, and license the results to companies willing to pay for precision science. My name appears in the footnotes of other people's press releases. I had made peace with that long before my wife decided it was something to be ashamed of. Our problems started the year she was promoted to Vice President of Business Development at Veritin Pharmaceuticals. Before that, we were fine. Not perfect, but fine in the way that solid, unexciting things are fine. We had a house in Beaverton. 2 kids, my daughter Sophie, 14, quiet and ferociously perceptive, and my son Owen, 11, who had spent most of his childhood wrestling with dyslexia before a remarkable 3rd-grade teacher finally cracked the code with him. I coached his soccer team on Saturdays. I made pancakes on Sunday mornings. I was the kind of husband and father who shows up. I thought that mattered. The promotion changed something in my wife that I can only describe as a rearrangement of her entire sense of proportion. Suddenly our neighborhood was quaint. Our vacations were modest. My work, which she had always described to friends as research, began to be described as puttering. The man who had been climbing the ladder at Veritin with her, the one who would champion her promotion and whose name started appearing in her stories, the way a song gets stuck in your head. That man was Harrison Cole, the company's CEO. Harrison Cole was 52, silver-haired, and the kind of man who was photographed for business magazines standing in front of floor-to-ceiling windows. My wife had never spoken about a colleague the way she spoke about him. Every inflection was slightly too warm, every anecdote slightly too detailed, I noticed. I said nothing. I kept hoping. The breaking point came on our 15th wedding anniversary. My wife had planned dinner at a restaurant downtown, her choice, made without asking me, and presented me with a gift bag over dessert. Inside was a tie, polyester, gray, with a faint repeating pattern of microscopes. The clearance sticker from a discount pharmacy chain was still attached, and there was a note, written in her handwriting on a Veritin notepad. For when you finally go somewhere worth dressing up for, happy anniversary to my career scientist. I looked at the tie for a long moment. The waiter refilled my water glass. I thought it was funny, she said, already reaching for her phone. You know, the microscope pattern. Because that's basically your whole world. I folded the note. I put it in my jacket pocket. I said, "Thank you." She missed my expression entirely because she was reading a message from someone, smiling at the screen with a softness she hadn't directed at me in over a year. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and turned that stupid tie over in my hands. 14 years. 2 children. A mortgage we paid down together. Reduced to a $7 joke from a pharmacy bin. I opened my laptop and typed Harrison Cole's name into a legal database I subscribed to for patent research. What I found in the next 2 hours did not surprise me. What it did was clarify everything. The following week, I drove across town to have lunch with my old friend Raymond Achebe, a corporate attorney I'd known since graduate school. We met at a sandwich place near his office, the kind of unremarkable spot where no one from Veritin would ever eat. I told him everything. Raymond listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always respected about him. When I finished, he set down his coffee and was quiet for a moment. "How solid are your patents?" he asked. "The 3 delivery compound patents?" he asked. "The 3 delivery compound patents? Airtight. I've had acquisition offers from 4 companies in the past 2 years. You never sold because of stability. Family reasons. My wife was building her career at Veritin. Selling to a competitor felt like creating friction. I kept waiting for the right time." I laughed, short and humorless. "I think the right time just arrived." Raymond leaned forward. "Marcus, you need to hear something. Veritin's parent company, Callaway Group, has been quietly hemorrhaging institutional investors for 6 months. There are whispers in regulatory circles about Harrison Cole cutting corners on a Phase 3 trial for their flagship compound. Nothing public yet, but the FDA has been asking questions." I put my coffee down. "What kind of corners?" "The kind that get executives indicted." Raymond looked at me carefully. "I'm not suggesting anything reckless, but if someone with significant capital were to acquire a meaningful stake in Callaway Group in the next 60 days, they would have a very interesting seat at a very important table. I drove home that afternoon with my mind running calculations it hadn't run in years. Over the following 3 weeks, I moved carefully. I sold my 3 primary patents to Denova Sciences, a Veriton competitor that had been courting me since the previous spring, for $4.8 million. The number landed in my account with a quietness that felt almost comic. Years of work, distilled into a wire transfer on a Tuesday morning. Raymond helped me establish a holding entity. We called it Meridian Peak Consulting, which told anyone who searched it absolutely nothing useful. Through a combination of direct purchases and a quiet arrangement with 2 institutional investors who were already looking for an exit from Callaway Group, Meridian Peak accumulated just over 22% of Callaway's outstanding shares over a period of 4 weeks, enough to formally request a seat at the quarterly advisory meeting. Enough to force a conversation that certain people very much did not want to have. At home, I was the same man I had always been. I made dinner. I helped Owen with his reading exercises. I attended Sophie's debate tournament on a Friday night in October, while my wife was at what she described as a strategy retreat. Sophie won her semifinal round and looked for her mother in the bleachers, found only me, and then arranged her face into something that tried to be okay with that. I put my arm around her shoulders and told her she had been extraordinary. She leaned into me, and I felt the particular weight of a child deciding not to say what they're actually thinking. On the drive home, she said it anyway. "Dad, I know about Harrison." I kept my eyes on the road. "What do you know?" "I'm 14, not 7. Her voice was careful, the way she got when she was trying to be fair even about unfair things. "She talks to him differently than she talks to you. She always has her phone face down when he calls. I've seen his name on her screen." I exhaled slowly. "I'm handling it." "Are you going to leave her?" "I'm going to make sure you and Owen are protected. That's the first thing. Everything else comes after." She looked out the passenger window at the passing streetlights. "Owen thinks nothing's wrong. Let's keep it that way as long as we can." She nodded once. Then, quietly, "I'm glad you came tonight, Dad. She's been missing a lot of things." I didn't trust myself to answer that, so I just reached over and squeezed her hand. The FDA advisory panel review of Veriton's compound trial was scheduled for a Thursday morning at a federal building in downtown Portland. Callaway Group's quarterly shareholder meeting had been moved to the same week at the request of several newly nervous board members. Raymond had maneuvered things carefully so that both would require my presence in ways that could not be easily ignored or dismissed. I arrived at the advisory panel review first. I was there not as an angry husband, but as a credentialed independent researcher who had been granted observer status through my role as a Callaway shareholder, with formal concerns about the scientific integrity of data underlying a major company asset. The room was a conference table, government fluorescent lighting, a row of FDA scientific advisors, and a small number of Veriton's senior scientific staff. Harrison Cole walked in 3 minutes late. He was exactly what his photograph suggested. Composed, polished, the kind of man accustomed to being the most powerful person in any given room. He did not look at me when he sat down. Why would he? The panel chair called the session to order and introduced the agenda. When they reached the item concerning the Phase 3 data submission, I raised my hand. "I'd like to formally submit materials on behalf of Meridian Peak Consulting, a Callaway Group shareholder with specific concerns regarding the statistical methodology used in the Phase 3 efficacy analysis." The panel chair looked at me. "And your scientific basis for raising this concern?" "I'm the author of the underlying delivery compound technology that Veriton licensed in 2021. I have a working familiarity with the parameters the trial was designed to measure. What I've reviewed in the public filing shows a statistically anomalous responder rate compression in the 12-week cohort that is inconsistent with the mechanism of action." I slid a bound document across the table to the chair. "I've prepared a technical summary, copies, for all panel members." Harrison Cole's head turned slowly toward me, and I watched the precise moment his expression changed. Recognition. Recalibration. A very controlled kind of alarm. "Mr. he began. "Webb. Marcus Webb." I met his eyes. "I believe you're familiar with my work. Veriton licensed 2 of my earlier compounds in 2019. The room was silent for 3 full seconds. "These are extremely serious scientific concerns," the panel chair said, leafing through the document. "We'll need to formally review this material. Mr. Cole, Veriton will have an opportunity to respond. But I want to be direct. The irregularities identified here are significant enough to warrant a full data audit before this panel can make any recommendation. Harrison's composure held, but only technically. This is clearly a motivated submission, he said, measured and dangerous. Mr. Webb has a competitive interest through De Novo Sciences, who recently acquired his patents. Mr. Webb's potential interests don't invalidate the scientific methodology concerns he's raised. One of the panel scientists said, already making notes. The analysis speaks for itself. After the session adjourned, Harrison Cole walked past me in the hallway. He stopped. "You have no idea what you've just done," he said quietly. I looked at him with the complete calm of someone who has spent 4 weeks not sleeping and has come out the other side of exhaustion into something harder. "I think I have a fairly clear idea. The panel is going to audit the trial data. What they find is on you, not me. You did this because of Lauren. I did this because you falsified clinical data on a drug that sick people are going to take. What you did with my wife is a separate matter." I paused, though I'm handling that separately as well. He held my gaze for a moment, then walked away. My wife was home when I arrived that evening, which surprised me. She was in the kitchen, phone in hand, a glass of wine already poured. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in a long time, something verging on uncertain. "Harrison called me," she said. "I imagine he did. He said you were at the FDA review. He said you're a Callaway shareholder." She stared at me. "He said you submitted a formal scientific challenge to the trial data. Marcus, what is going on? Where did you get that kind of money?" I set my bag down and walked to the refrigerator. I poured myself a glass of water. I turned around and leaned against the counter. "I sold the patents," I said, "the ones you used to call my little projects in the garage." She stared at me. De Novo Sciences paid $4.8 million. I used part of that to take a 22% stake in Callaway Group through a holding company. I kept my voice level. "The FDA panel is going to audit Veriton's Phase 3 data. Based on what I've reviewed, they're going to find problems. Significant ones. You're doing this to hurt Harrison." Her voice was thin. "I'm doing this because the trial data is fraudulent." I held her gaze. "Harrison Cole has been submitting manipulated efficacy numbers to the FDA for a drug that's scheduled for approval in 6 months. That isn't a personal dispute, that's a federal matter. You can't just..." She stopped, started again. "You've been hiding all of this for weeks. While you've been here every night making dinner and helping Owen with his homework, you were doing all of this." "Yes." "Why didn't you say anything? Would you have listened?" The question sat between us for a moment. 6 months ago, you told me my entire career was a very sweet hobby. 4 weeks ago, you gave me a clearance rack tie with a note about how I never go anywhere worth dressing up for. I reached into my jacket pocket and put the folded Veriton notepad page on the counter between us. "I've been listening to what you actually think of me for a long time. I thought it was worth acting on." She looked at the note. Something moved across her face. "Marcus," she said, and her voice had changed register completely. "Is this about you and me? Are we..." "I filed for divorce this morning." I said it without cruelty, which took something out of me. "The papers are in the envelope on my desk. Raymond Ashive is representing me. He's also the one who helped me structure Meridian Peak." She sat down at the kitchen table. The wine glass was in front of her, but she didn't touch it. "The children," she finally said. "I've requested primary physical custody. You'll have consistent visitation. I'm not trying to cut you out of their lives. They need their mother, but they also need consistency. And for the last year and a half, I've been the one providing it." I paused. Sophie knew. She's known for months. I didn't tell her. She figured it out herself. My wife closed her eyes. "If you contest the custody arrangement aggressively, I have documentation from a private investigator I hired 6 weeks ago, and from my own records of your absences. Sophie's debate tournaments, Owen's reading assessments, the school conferences you marked as attended and weren't." My voice stayed even. "I don't want to use any of that. I would rather we agree on what's fair for the kids and move forward. But I will use it if I have to." She was quiet for a very long time. "I didn't think you had this in you," she said at last. "You stopped paying attention," I replied. "That's how you missed it." The next 2 weeks moved in a kind of controlled storm. Harrison Cole did not go to Dubai. He hired a crisis PR firm and released a statement attributing the FDA inquiry to competitive interference from De Novo Sciences. His attorney sent a letter threatening civil litigation against Meridian Peak for market manipulation. Raymond found it unpersuasive and said so in writing. The FDA data audit took 11 weeks. I won't pretend those 11 weeks were easy. Harrison used the time to work the phones, and some of it landed. A business journal ran a piece suggesting that my involvement was motivated by personal grievance. My daughter called me after reading it on her phone and asked if I was okay. I'm fine, I told her. The article makes it sound like you're the bad guy. I know. People who are about to be caught often try to make the person who caught them the story. It's a delay tactic. I sat down on the porch steps. Sophie, did I do the right thing? She considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. Harrison Cole was lying about medicine, right? Yes. Then yes, you did the right thing. The rest of it is just noise. I was quiet for a moment. When did you get so clear-headed? I've always been clear-headed, she said. You raised me. The audit findings were released on a Wednesday morning. The FDA panel concluded that Veritan's Phase 3 submission contained material statistical irregularities in the primary efficacy endpoints, specifically a systematic exclusion of non-responder data from the 12-week cohort analysis. Veritan's approval application was placed on full clinical hold. Harrison Cole and Veritan's chief medical officer were referred to the Department of Justice for potential criminal misrepresentation in a federal regulatory submission. Harrison Cole did not go to Dubai. He went to a federal courthouse in Portland to be arraigned on 2 counts. I watched the brief clip on a news site, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee at 7 in the morning. Owen was eating cereal across from me and didn't know who the man on the screen was. Sophie watched over my shoulder for a moment, said nothing, and poured her own coffee. She had started drinking it that year. My wife did not contest the custody arrangement. She moved into an apartment in the Pearl District and began the process of rebuilding from something that looked, for the first time in years, like an honest foundation. She showed up to Owen's soccer game 3 weeks after she moved out, standing on the far side of the field until I waved her over. It was the right thing to do. She was still his mother. Our divorce was finalized on a gray November morning. Raymond and I walked out of the courthouse and stood on the steps in the cold air. And Raymond said something about lunch, and I said yes, and that was that. The months that followed were not simple. I won't pretend they were. Sophie went through a phase of quiet fury at her mother that I tried not to encourage, because anger is easier to indulge than to outgrow. Owen cried once, on a Sunday night, asking why our family couldn't go back to the way it was before. I held him and told him that some things break and can't be put back the same way, but that doesn't mean they can't become something good. He wiped his face on my sleeve and asked if we could get pizza. We got pizza. Meridian Peak remained a Callaway shareholder through the subsequent restructuring. When the board brought in new scientific leadership to rebuild Veritan's credibility, Raymond nominated me to serve on the Scientific Advisory Committee, a role I accepted on the condition that my involvement be strictly limited to methodological review. I had no interest in running a pharmaceutical company. I had patents to develop and a lab to run, and 2 children who needed me to actually be present. The winter passed. Then spring. In March, I stood at the front of a small conference room in Denova Sciences and watched a group of oncology researchers discuss the clinical application of the delivery compound I'd spent 6 years developing in that converted warehouse on the east side of Portland. The lead researcher paused at one point and said, "The precision of the dosing mechanism in this compound is unlike anything we've seen in this class. Whoever designed this understood the biology at a level most formulation teams never reach." He didn't know I was in the room. He was talking to his own team. Raymond, sitting beside me, pressed his lips together to keep from smiling. On the drive home that afternoon, I stopped at a pharmacy to pick up Owen's prescription refill. I was standing at the counter, waiting for the pharmacist when I noticed the tie rack near the front of the store. A spinning wire display with the picked-over end-of-season inventory. Polyester neckwear for $5 and $6. The kind of rack you'd buy a clearance gift from if you wanted to make a point. I stood there for a moment, hands in my coat pockets. Then I went back to the pharmacy counter, collected my son's prescription, and drove home. That evening, I made dinner. Chicken and rice, nothing complicated, and Sophie helped Owen with a book report while I cooked. Their voices carried from the dining room into the kitchen, Sophie doing that particular older sibling thing where she corrects patiently but without condescension, the way she'd learned from watching me work with him. Owen laughed at something, and Sophie laughed too, and I stood at the stove and let the sound of it move through me. My wife came to pick the kids up for the weekend on Saturday morning. She rang the doorbell, which she always did now, rather than walking in. A small gesture of respect that cost her something and that I noticed. Owen ran for the door and she hugged him for a long time. Sophie followed at a measured pace and accepted her mother's embrace with the careful warmth of someone who is still deciding how much trust has been earned back. "They're good kids," my wife said to me over their heads. "They are," I agreed. She looked at me for a moment, and there was something in her face that I recognized as the beginning of a longer sentence. An apology that hadn't fully formed itself yet, or maybe a question. I didn't push for it. "Drive safe," I said. I went inside. I went to my office, which used to be a reading room, before I took it over with research files and specimen notebooks and 2 additional monitors. In the top left drawer, underneath a stack of patent correspondence, was a gift bag. I had never thrown it away. Not out of bitterness, or maybe a little out of bitterness in the beginning, but because at some point it had stopped being a wound and started being a marker. The place on a trail where you realized you had been going in the wrong direction and turned. I spent 14 years being careful and steady and present. I turned down the prestigious consulting contracts that would have taken me away from my children's evenings. I had not sought recognition for the compounds that bore other companies' names in the press. I had been the kind of man who builds things that last and does not need anyone to notice. And my wife had decided that made me small. She was wrong. And I had proven it in the only language that particular conversation required. I closed the drawer. I opened my laptop and pulled up the proposal for the De Novo Fellowship Program, a 3-year research grant for early career chemists from underrepresented backgrounds, which I'd been developing for the past 2 months. I wanted the selection criteria to prioritize independent thinkers, the kind of researchers who do their best work without an audience, because I'd learned something about what that work could actually be worth when the right moment finally came. I would name the fellowship after my father, who had been an electrician and a careful man, who had taught me by example that the quality of the thing you build matters more than whether anyone is watching you build it. Outside, the late afternoon light was doing something particular to the street. That low, flat March light that makes everything look exactly as real as it is. No softer, no harsher, just clear. My phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Raymond. Heard from Callaway's new board chair. They want you to consider a formal advisory role. Compensation is significant. Thought you should know. I read it twice, then set the phone face down. I had things to finish.